Hey, good morning. Thank you for joining us. We hope to have a very uh, interesting and exciting conversation, and hopefully you guys have a lot of questions of the panel. I am Jay Patel with Cactus Communications. I'm the head of sales for Americas, and this is my first Charleston conference. So really excited to be here, and just great to see everyone. I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. So if we can start with Jolyn.
Hi, I'm Jolyn Paspa. I'm the Director of Library Services at Carnegie Mellon University Libraries.
Good morning. I'm Scott Garrison. I'm the Executive Director of the Midwest Collaborative for Library Services, which serves over 640 academic, public school, and special libraries throughout Indiana and Michigan.
Hello, everybody. Ooh, sorry. Try this again. Hello, everybody. My name is Liz Lerbier. I'm the Library Director at Western Michigan University Homer Stryker MD School of Medicine in Kalamazoo.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And just to make sure everyone's in the right room, we're going to be talking about a very not so great topic of our artificial intelligence in the libraries. So I hope you brought your questions. So I'm just going to start off with some questions. No slides, no nothing. Really, I just don't like making slides, and I know you don't like looking at slides, so let's just get to the questions. So the first one, and we'll go down from Joel and down to Liz, is does your institution have a policy on the use of AI by faculty and students?
I know I'm like leaning up to. So at CMU, I guess it's sort of like a no, but yes. So we don't have a specific policy that addresses the use of AI for teaching and learning, but there's some recommendations that faculty can follow. And I think, impetus or the thinking behind that is that we already have language in our policies that address the acceptable or unacceptable use of unauthorized assistance is I think the language that they use. And so that basically includes artificial intelligence or any kind of tools that someone might use for their work. And there are a number of recommendations for faculty templates that have been created by our Center for Teaching and Learning. If faculty, it's sort of like a decision tree or a flow chart. So if you want to encourage students to use large language models and AI, this is how you put that language in your syllabus. If you want to strictly prohibit it, you can take that approach. Or if you want to kind of have a blended approach, there's language for that. And so it's largely left up to the discretion of the instructors and faculty and how they want to approach it. So they have a lot of autonomy in deciding how that's supposed to work.
We're going to move to me next and then end with Scott. So I'm at a medical school. We have professional students who are studying to be doctors. So we generally do not write papers each course. However, 40% of our medical students actually publish while in medical school, and they'll publish between 1 to 8 articles. And we don't necessarily have policy per se, but we are an edited paper pail customer. And we use that tool to help clean up our manuscripts. And also the faculty mentors will use paper pail for editing. So imagine that we have 76 faculty, and those 76 faculty have learners, and they may have anywhere from like 3 to 20 learners doing research, generally case reports, systematic reviews, literature reviews, meta-analysis. So plus they're practicing clinicians. So we use it for efficiency. We do have an integrity officer, and we make it very clear in our student handbook about professionalism. I make it very clear about attribution to put in the acknowledgments of your manuscript that you did use this tool. Just I use this tool for my editing. So So at the medical school, because we have policies around professionalism, plagiarism, integrity, we do not have one on AI right now. So when do we get a policy? At my medical school, we tend to write policy when we have a mea culpa or things are going really south fast. So, so we have a little bit of a different view being at a professional school.
So zooming way out to think about this from a consortial perspective, as a consortium that serves hundreds of libraries that has a lot of data about those libraries, we're thinking at a much higher level about how we'll use AI internally and communicate that to libraries, given how important it is to be transparent about how you train and use AI, as well as exactly when a user is interacting with it. One example, of course, about how consortia are dealing with AI is in licensing terms, and that's all over the map right now. We're seeing a lot of language coming up in new agreements. And our staff, having said all of that, our staff have begun dabbling with AI in various ways to help author content for things like newsletter content and things of that nature. So our management team has really begun to discuss what appropriate AI use is for our staff. And some consortia, like SCELC in California, has actually made good progress on internal policy around how staff use AI.
All right, great, thank you. And so, Joel and Liz, while your institutions don't have AI policies, do you ever have faculty or students come to you and ask you about the policies of publishers and journals? Because I know many publishers and journals have AI policies, both for authors and reviewers, as well as for what researchers can do with the content. So how, are there resources that you use for that? Or, what advice do you give, your stakeholders when they come to you?
Do you want me to go first? So I'm the faculty member that teaches scholarly publishing at the medical school. And I tell my learners and faculty, if there's 3 things you need to listen to, number 1 is read the instructions to authors. And there's many publishers in here that understand when you get a manuscript when people don't read the instructions. It's really important for publishers to be very clear what the expectation is for the authors. So if you have certain expectations, you need to put that in the instructions and make that clear. So many publishers, especially in the medical sciences, will ask you to disclose when you're submitting your manuscript, did you use any type of AI? I tell my learners and my faculty, this is where you need to put this in. This does not mean that they're not going to accept your manuscript unless you've done something that they've outlined in the instructions that says don't do. So I think that it's really up to the publishers to kind of set the expectations with authors, and authors will follow through. The other thing is that I tell and instruct the students and the faculty that the publishers use AI, they use plagiarism tools, so they're going to probably catch you if you did do something that you're not supposed to do. And generally, when I have a student who says, my paper was rejected within 24 to 48 hours, I can tell that those publishers have really good tools to pick up. And so the first thing I do is let's take your manuscript and put it through a plagiarism checker and see where it lights up. So I think publishers are doing their part, but I think it's really up to you all to set that tone, and that's what our authors will follow.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I mean, personally, I don't have a lot of, direct interaction with researchers just in my day-to-day, and most of my teams are more behind the scenes. But I do know that we have a lot of, reference content for first-year writing students and our campus community in general on how to go about citing generative AI and any sort of AI tools. And I haven't actually seen how that translates to the submission for manuscript aspect, but it's an evolving landscape for sure.
All right, great. I know one of the things that comes up a lot in my conversations with, mostly publishers and societies is this battle between fair use and copyright protection. And I know it's a very thorny and tricky issue because everyone wants to protect copyright, but you also want to allow people to use that data and research to keep furthering science and understanding. And I know there was something you mentioned in our planning calls, Jolan, about fair use and fair learning. So, can you explain a little bit about, how you approach this?
I think it's just kind of an interesting, it's almost like an existential question that we can ask ourselves as information professionals. And like, at what point does content become data? Because if you think about how large language models and AI is trained, it's essentially taking, text data and tokenizing it, turning it into mathematical representations, and then feeding it into this large, algorithm system. So it does, I think it just depends on the individual case in terms of what you would consider fair use. But, the core concepts of fair use and copyright have to do with how transformative something is, whether something is commercial versus non-commercial, and the kind of, I guess, nature of the original work. And then, of course, the impact on the market in the future. And I feel like we've seen use cases that have kind of traveled that full spectrum from, yes, this is purely commercial use, to, oh, this is interesting, research and inquiry investigation. So I think it's just kind of it's interesting to follow the conversation and see how the precedent evolves. But I think where it's really alarming is if you see large language models that are kind of reproducing text in its entirety exactly from the data sources that it was training from. And that's where I think people are getting kind of scared, and that's where things are problematic. But just from a fair use perspective, to me, it seems like this is a transformative use of content, and we sort of have to come to terms with that because we've been doing scholarship that takes a very similar approach in different ways, and this is just kind of the next new and unexplored frontier.
Yeah.
That, and, I'm no copyright expert, but of course we know that large language models scrape copyrighted data, and some, like the New York Times, are suing over that, and some, like the Library Copyright Alliance, are defending against that. So one way to think about copyright in AI content that I've seen is thinking about it in terms of training, output, and use. So in terms of training, the Library Copyright Alliance says that because tens, if not hundreds of millions of works are ingested to create an LLM, the contribution of any one work of the operation of the LLM is de minimis. So they make a proportionality argument there. And they talk about the fact that copyright owners can employ technical means such as the robots exclusion protocol to prevent their works from being used to train AI. So that's a bit about the training end of it. Then you'll see license terms from companies like Springer Nature talking about neither a licensee nor authorized users shall update, change, revise, adapt, modify, translate, transform, or create any derivative work of the content using AI tools. So that's some specific language from a publisher. Library Copyright Alliance also talks about output in terms of if an AI produces a work that is substantially similar in protected expression to a work that was ingested by the AI, that new work does infringe the copyright of the original work. So there are some nuances there. And there was an interesting piece that came out from Stanford last year talking about use. So to Jolan's point about if an entire work is ingested into an LLM, what if someone requests their LLM based AI tool to read that book to them? Does that constitute a legal free audiobook or not? Interesting question.
Yeah. Not a lot of easy answers and a lot of tough questions, but hopefully as these cases wind through the courts, we'll get some more clarity on at least where the law sits. But I think we can probably all agree that it's going to be messy for a long time to come. It's not going to be resolved very quickly. That's great. So, while copyright is still an issue and fair use is something that, we're trying to grapple with, users are still using these systems to discover research or to summarize it or to understand it better. How how are you all seeing the behavior of the user changing as far as the way that they're discovering information that they need on a day-to-day basis?
I mean, I'll just say that it's still kind of early days for us. We don't really have data on this necessarily, and we're at the point now where we're looking at implementing the Primo Research Assistant for our discovery layer, which is essentially an LLM layer that sits on top of your normal Primo searches. So we're having conversations around that, but it does kind of raise the question of how people are going to be approaching our systems to seek information. And the way that large language models are training our users is to engage in a conversation, essentially, which is so different from our previous practice of having a keyword and putting it into a search box and combing through the results. And in some ways, I think this is great because it makes the interaction with systems a bit more approachable for someone who does not have any kind of training or information literacy that they're bringing to the table. But then it also makes it problematic because the whole concept of agency in the information seeking process is kind of removed from the equation, because oftentimes if you get results that are summarized, you might be inclined to accept what is presented as correct and factual without digging into citations if they're presented or not. Because that's maybe the path of least resistance. But that doesn't really encourage researchers to kind of delve deeper and ask further questions. And so I think the idea of this kind of literacy, that algorithmic literacy or whatever sort of information literacy that involves AI as an additional layer, we need to kind of explore that further and get a better understanding of how users are changing their interactions with our systems.
So I work with professional students in graduate school, and I'm sure, as you know, in healthcare, especially doctors, they need to be as efficient as possible with their time. So we see AI as an efficiency tool. I will tell you that most faculty are on board with using AI in everything they do. There are some that have reservations, and that's fine. And the reservations are I respect. They feel that if you're going to write a paper, you need to like start from scratch, not have writing prompts, kind of more of a traditional approach. And I get that. I think that also makes you introduces you to research, or makes you strong. On the other hand, I do have faculty that say, like, I have like 20 manuscripts to edit. I need to be as efficient as possible, and I have clinical time. I will say this. Last year, we had to change the way we assigned evidence-based learning for synthesizing knowledge in the clinical articles. We found that in the assignments that we were grading, that we're like, this is a lot like ChatGPT. So we had to change it to more that we had to think about how can we do the assignment where you can't use ChatGPT, or you use it in a way that helps you answer questions, but you have to kind of think of the prompts. And so we had to do a lot of that the past year, of what does it need to look like? How do we engage people in synthesizing new knowledge? Because what makes you progress in a medical education program is that what you're reading in the clinical literature, you're able to synthesize that and then practice, right? So your first year of medicine, you can't do that whatsoever. You can barely read the article. By your fourth year, you should be on your way, but you're still not all of them are fully there. They will be in residency. I promise you that. So don't be afraid of PGY1s. they're getting there. So we have to kind of like, how do we get them to do that? So we find articles and we teach them. This is something you can't do with AI. We have to teach them how to take apart an article, synthesize that, and apply that knowledge. The other thing is critical thinking. I think that there's a really good article in the Chronicle of Higher Education about the way we teach children in the last 20 years. Critical thinking has evolved quite differently, and that they're not as prepared for college. It's really important that if you are instructors, especially information literacy, is to team up and make sure that everybody has that critical thinking and can do fact-based knowledge and question. So we don't want to produce doctors that just like whatever they see in the clinical diagnostic tool or whatever they read in a published article, that they have that critical thinking and they're asking questions like, what is the bias? And that's really hard for a learner to say, like, read this article and tell us the bias. And they're like, there is no bias, or we have this bias and that bias, and they're still kind of learning. So those are really critical tools that we have to teach in college, so that anything that the AI produces, we're like, is this really true? Where would I go to double check my information before I go and carry that out in patient care?
I'll just tag on this and zoom out a little bit further. Has anyone read the book Mastering AI by Jeremy Kahn that was published earlier this summer? It's a great book. It's already out of date, of course, because AI is moving so quickly. But one of the things that Kahn talks about is basically Khan Academy plus GPT-4 equals a new tool called Khanmigo. He talks about personal agents being the next wave of AI, and how that will entirely change how a student starting from very early in their K-12 experience all the way out to higher ed will interact with technology in terms of information seeking. And maybe this agent might get to know the student well enough over their time using the system to be able to give advice about college programs and things of that nature, like, okay, where should I go after high school? Another development that I've seen just this week, I think, is the Claude desktop app. So that essentially could turn into the new Google. If you install an AI desktop app, do you need Google anymore, or do you need a traditional library search kind of method? So those are just a couple of thoughts.
No, thank you for that. That's really interesting. And when you mentioned Khan Academy and Khanmigo, I've been working in the AI space for the past 10 plus years. And of course, I help develop AI applications and sell them because I'm a salesperson. But one of the things that I really use AI for, rather than just in my job, but my personal life, is I help my kids better prepare for quizzes and tests. So, my daughter just started 9th grade, and she started really terribly with her bio and her AP World History. And so she was super freaked out, and she's nervous as it is anyway. But the thing we started doing was I started preparing quizzes and tests for her using Notebook LM, which is a new product from Google, just to help her prepare for and to reduce her anxiety levels when it comes to taking exams or taking quizzes. And that's really helped her lift her grades and be better prepared. So, these are the sort of things that people are probably trying in their personal lives, or students are already trying to work out on their own in K through 12, but also in college and going further. So there's some really interesting use cases here. So one, this question just came to me while I was hearing you all talk, but one thing I've heard over the past at least year, 2 years from publishers is that they anticipate the traffic to their sites to drop as AI overviews and things like that become more popular, because many people might just take the answers that are given to them by AI at face value and not click through the original sources. So my question was, how do you envision that impacting usage on the library side? And then how will that impact your relationships or your business agreements with publishers?
I'm going to be, not to do a self-plug, but I'm going to be talking about this a little bit later this afternoon and evaluating usage and AI tools. But I mean, we have struggled with how to best collect usage data for resources for, I don't know, over 20 years now. And it seems like it just becomes a more complicated layering of data from different sources that show you different aspects of usage so that you can understand the full landscape of what's going on. And now AI is changing that whole process, right? So is it a good thing if someone submits 25 queries in order to get an LLM engaging with you the way that you want, or should it just be like a one and done? And so what is a successful number of engagements it takes with an AI tool to get the information that you need? And presumably as the learning curve, as people kind of master the tools, you should be able to get in and work more efficiently. And that's the whole idea. These are tools to make our work more efficient. So that's one thing to think about. But then there's also the question of, is traffic to a website the kind of end goal for content providers? Because we're already seeing, Wall Street Journal or suing ChatGPT or OpenAI because they're scraping their data and people aren't going to the Wall Street Journal or I think it's the Dow Jones. So content providers are seeing an impact on their bottom line, and I think that makes them care more about how AI tools are impacting the way that people engage with their content. And so then the question is, where does the value lie in creating content and pushing it out to consumers? Is it in the platform? Is it in the content itself? I think metadata is going to be an even more important aspect of this landscape as things continue to evolve, because that's really how computers make sense of what they're ingesting. And we can think about how maybe metadata is going to be an important aspect of understanding content usage, and maybe also like the provenance of where data is coming from and going to, and how content is kind of making its way through various data pipelines. So all over the place, but.
Scott or Liz?
I mean, I might just add to the metadata point that I think reinforcement learning from human feedback is going to be really important there. And Jeremy Kahn points out that the companies that will be most successful with AI will be the ones that run the feedback loop between people, data, and AI the fastest.
Not to do product shout outs, but we have a trial to both Skype and Kenius. And so this is what I envision for the future. I hope that people will do a literature review, but for those who do a crummy, so let me just back up for a second. What I see AI in the future is making a really strong, great researcher even better, and making someone who is very weak in writing and information literacy worse. So I see that. But we have been playing with these tools where you can start to write and it's finding you citations. Are they perfect yet? No. You still need to do a literature review. But we're not going to sugarcoat that you're going to be going to the website. We're not going to sugarcoat that you're going to try to do a fancy search hedge in PubMed. We know that our faculty and our students, our biggest enemy is time. So how can we make it efficient? We know that there are issues, and we're training our users, and while they demo, they're like, oh, it found an article from like 2015, but there's a newer one. So we kind of are looking at things. I think it will increase the efficiency of these tools once we start reporting back to the vendors. But I think that we need to look forward and decide, like, what does the workforce of tomorrow need? What is going to prepare them the best to be first of all, be hireable and be future employees? If we're in our graduate school in medicine, if we're producing researchers of tomorrow, we want to get that bench to bedside or that bedside to full manuscript as quickly as possible. We want to solve wicked health problems. So we see these tools as opportunity. That also has to be married with good information literacy, which many librarians are doing a really great job. I get to benefit that from the graduate school. I see your work and it's working.
Great, thank you. And I promise we'll take some questions, but one last question to the panel is, so I could just briefly as you can, what do you see as the upsides and downsides of AI when it comes to libraries? And this time we'll start with Scott.
So I'll lead off with a downside. AI is only as good as the training data it gets, and as Liz said, it does contain biases and gaps. For example, if an AI tool only has access to a certain data set about a certain number of populations, it can only be so smart in terms of recommending diagnosis and things of that nature. So if it's lacking information about women or about Black people or other specific demographics, then it will be a lot less powerful. Another downside maybe that I'll focus on is, just briefly, is the idea that if students start to over-rely and researchers over-rely on AI, does that atrophy their critical thinking and other skills?
Maybe I'll try to do a counterpoint and sort of think of the upsides. We in libraries are information professionals, and when was the last time that people were so excited about information habits? I mean, I feel like AI has really raised the profile of information as a commodity, as a resource, and the power of information to transform society. And I think librarians are well positioned to shape this landscape, get involved at this early stage, and really be at the table as decision making is happening. So, this is my chance to talk about metadata that's really important, and transparency and bias and how to do things responsibly. And so I think that AI is really exciting because we are right in the middle of this, and it's our opportunity to really help to usher this new technology responsibly.
I'll just quickly say, where I've seen it be very helpful is for our non-native English-speaking faculty who really have brilliant forward-thinking ideas, but getting it onto paper is very difficult. It takes them twice as long to write a paper in English. And so with these tools, I've seen them be more efficient and write stronger papers. So I think there is some equity in that, since we in the US have so many faculty and students where English is just not a first language, or they're just not strong writers. They didn't have the opportunities in high school to get what they needed. And so I see it more as equity for those who really struggle, but yet have the ideas and the thoughts, and they just need help putting it on the paper.
Great, thank you very much. So I want to ask, do you have any questions, or if we answered them all?